Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to our INDEP online talk From Models to Modules, Rethinking Postcapitalist Political Economy with, again, sorry for the name pronunciation, Sophie, Elias, Pinsonnault and Simon Tremblay-Pepin. And Sophie is a PhD student at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and Simon is professor of social innovation at St. Paul University, Ottawa. And just a short description of the event. Debates on democratic economic planning have hitherto revolved mainly around coherent, abstract models. These all-in-one proposals compartmentalize discussions in technical jargon and hide the political and strategic debates that lie behind them. We propose to bring the field to think about democratic planning through a modular approach. Conceiving post-capitalist proposals as assemblages of modules enables us to think about the plurality of possibilities and the different stages of transition. And the original text for this has been published in French. You can find it under the link in the chat. And now, Sophie and Simon, take it away.
Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you for facilitating the discussion today. Thank you to Jason for the technical aspect. It's always fun to be here at INDEP, a very important network. Very nice to have a lot of people with us today for such a technical question that will try to be funny, even though it's a bit specialized and technical. But I will share my screen. We have prepared a PowerPoint, and now you should see it. I hope everything's working. Yes, Eric says it is, so I will trust him and start right away. This is our reflection here starts from a very research-oriented reflection on post-capitalism. Sophie and I have been working together for many years now, but I've been working a bit before that because I'm a bit older on this question for a few years again. And understanding models of democratic economic planning was part of what I did for like 10 years and trying to understand them, compare them, and all that. And at some point, it came a moment where, this quest for the understanding of models seemed a bit frustrating. And therefore, the idea of developing something new, a new approach to post-capitalism was needed. And I think this presentation is the result of that frustration. So what we'll do today, and I'll go quickly through the plan because you'll see that unfold anyway, but we'll start by post-capitalist political economy, which is the term we use for the big field of what INDEP is interested into. Then a quick few words about models and what they are, what they do, and which models exist, etc., etc. But as it's not our goal to talk about models, we'll try to go quickly on this. And then after that, we'll see the advantages and disadvantages of models. And we'll get to the core of our presentation and talk about this transition to modules that we are proposing. We'll present a few research avenues that we think this transition opens up and conclude after that. And then we'll be obviously happy to take any of your questions. So let's get going. What's post-capitalist political economy? Sophie, Mathieu, that I saw here, and Audrey Lorraine Amott and Bengi Agbulut, that maybe a few of you know, were all trying to trying to edit would be more precise, a handbook on post-capitalist political economy. So you'll have all the details about that when it'll be out, but since this is probably in 2 or 3 years, I'll give you some some ideas of what we mean by this. Is any thoughts or practices that deals with the political and economic functioning of a society that voluntarily evolves outside the institutions of capitalism. So this is quite a broad field that includes ideas and visions that were developed in the 19th century to models that are being discussed today, but also experimental and historical experiments and ideas that happened, be it the USSR and its model of central command economy, or the experiments that we can see in Rojava right now, or in the comunas in Venezuela. Those are examples of things that are inside the realm of post-capitalist political economy and can be studied by it. But today we will focus on something much more specific, and I'll let Sophie introduce you to that.
Yeah, so basically we see that the debates in what we can now understand as post-capitalist political economy, but if we go back, it has been related to radical political economy, comparative political economy, and other strands of thought. It has mostly been articulated around the idea of a model, and models in general. So like people presented their visions of a post-capitalist future in the form of a coherent whole of institutions. And here we define model as the theoretical simplification of the political and economic functioning of a society. And here we want to make clear to start with, like, what kind of model are we talking about? Because one of the main uses of the word model is the one that is used mostly in economics, but increasingly in other social sciences as well, and natural sciences, which talks more about the mathematically formalized models, which are mostly used to as a simplified representation of reality, and which are used to analyze relationships and causalities and to test hypotheses. And this is not what we'll be talking about today. This is somehow a different kind of models, and some people have written on like the ambiguities of using the term model for such different uses. But here we'll be using the word model as it's been used mostly in political science, and traditionally in comparative political science and comparative political economy. So more as a qualitative description of the political and economic functioning of a society, and either in a historical sense, when we talk, for example, about the Soviet model, we think about a specific vision of a society or an economic functioning, which is abstracted from the actual case and history of the Soviet economy. And we could talk about the Yugoslav model, about a lot of other types of models, which kind of embody an ideal type of way to organize the economy. But here we'll actually mostly focus on the speculative uses of models. So the people that have worked on presenting proposals for organizing the economy, post-capitalist economies, that have not actually been applied in real life yet. And so we talk about these as being speculative. And we'll mostly focus on these because I think it's the ones that benefit the most from a transition towards using modules, which we'll introduce soon. And it's also just because the real examples have been discussed in many ways. We can talk about real historical cases in a variety of ways, and it's of course obvious why we would look at specific aspects of historical cases. While when we talk about more abstract proposals of political, post-capitalist political economy that have not been applied yet, it's less obvious that we can talk about it in separate parts. And so we'll mostly focus on that here. And here's a timeline of such models, especially for the 20th century. So first we can mostly there's been, we say, 4 big periods of proposals. We can kind of gather them in these 4 periods. So first, during the USSR and like as the Soviet economy was still happening, and there were still already people that were thinking about the different ways we could organize an economy in a socialist way, most often, or in a post-capitalist way in general. And it was directly proposed in opposition, or at least as an alternative to the Soviet model. So we have Anton Pannekoek and the group of international communists that were talking about council communist societies. We have Diego de Santillan talking about the particular from the particular places of Spain, of Argentina, and proposing visions of direct democracy and vision based on anarchist principles. Cornelius Castoriadis and Murray Bookchin writing respectively from the context of France and of the US, and presenting alternatives to the Soviet model. Then we had, as the USSR came, let's say, that had increasing contradictions and came closer to its end, we had also the rise of proposals of market socialism, also anchored in the socialist calculation debate of the 20th century. Bruce and Lasky, Rudolf Barrow, Alec Knopf, and more recently Schweikart, and also John Romer and Diane Elson. And basically they were saying it would be possible to have socialism, but without having everything being planned, and having a big part of it being coordinated still by market, but in a socialist way. And somehow in opposition to that, as the Berlin Wall was falling, proposals that we could like call democratic planning proposals came as a response to the market socialist proposals, saying, well, we don't think organizing socialism with markets would be useful. We think there's another way that would be possible, that would also be different from central planning. And mostly these proposals say we could plan the economy in a more democratic way. And that's the case of people like Pat Devine, Michael Albert and Robin Hanna, Paul Koksha and Alan Cottrell, and Takis Fotopoulos and David Lehman more recently, that have proposed coherent models of a democratically planned economy. And now more recently, Saros, Marta Arnecker, Simon Stolity, and Stefan Meretz have proposed other models that are different and relate to some older models in some ways. For example, Stolity and Meretz focus more on the place of commons. And so all of these have they interacted a lot with each other, and they are also very anchored in the context where they emerged, of course. And so what we say is that they all have that in common. They all present a coherent set of institutions, and in that way there are advantages to that. Mainly, they are positive proposals, positive in the sense that they suggest something, they are a proposal. And this is quite rare in critical social sciences, since we are so focused on criticizing and critiquing capitalism, and often there are a lot of very nuanced and very precise critiques of capitalism, but that rarely emerges on positive proposals on how we could do things differently. And so in a way, in the context where we feel like there is no alternatives, and this is very dominant in the public discourse, having proposals of coherent set of institutions that say we could organize the economy in this way is often very useful. And it proves that there are alternatives, and that we have to fight for them. Even if they have not existed in the past, there's nothing that says they could not be operationalized. Then theoretically, it can also be useful because we can compare them. We can compare them with each other, and we can put them next to each other and see what the differences are. And we can also compare them with existing societies, and we can see in which ways they seem to be, different and similar. But we'll come back to that because in a way, it is a strength, but it is also weakness because we can't actually compare all of it if we always focus on the whole. But we'll come back to that. And finally, they do offer a vision that is inspiring. And so for political purposes, in activism and for social movements, they've been seen as something that we can offer to think and envision the future, and in a way they can motivate political action. But we're here today because they do have a lot of disadvantages, and that's what we'll mostly focus on. So focusing on these models has a high cost of entry puts a high cost of entry to the debates in post-capitalism. There's a lot of literature on the topic, and the authors they propose their model, they write a whole book on it, and then they write articles that serve to adapt it and to extend it. And so often, if you want to engage in these discussions, you have to master a very large amount of literature, and you are expected to understand all the details of models before you can actually tackle the more important and fundamental political and theoretical questions. And this leads to quite a repulsive debate mode where authors fight in a way on which model is the best, and a lot of people that join the field are asked to or feel the need to take a side. This leads to a quite male-dominated field, and we can see that there might be a relationship with the debate mode that is prevalent. It is quite far from current life, and that's a bit what I was saying earlier. That these models are often very abstract, and they are often anchored in their period where they emerge. And so a lot of them are really centered on Cold War debates. For example, a lot of them are focused on showing that it would be possible to maintain the standards of living that were prevalent during Fordist capitalism. And they don't have a lot of discussion about the ways that we could limit the scale of the economy and the environment, and discussions on the ways that it could be possible to have collective self-limitation and institutions to help doing that. And so they, even if these other preoccupations are very vivid and alive in other theoretical strands and in social movements, they are not very present in the models themselves, because the models are anchored in some other historical background and context. And even if there are appendages to them and they are still being discussed today, it remains that their fundamental core is to some extent still a bit in the past. And it makes it hard to just discuss these elements when we talk about coherent wholes. And then finally, it's quite difficult to have to link them with practice. it seems like they have been developed through theoretical reasoning, because the models often come with these abstract proposals that seem disconnected from reality and from the present day social movements, even though they were often developed having these concerns in mind, the concerns that are central to social movements, because often the authors were very involved in the social movements themselves. But since the proposals that they give are so abstract and often so different from today's realities and to the struggles, it seems like they are very disconnected. And so often to social practitioners and to social movements, they seem disconnected. And so it's hard to link them with practice and to integrate the discussion of post-capitalist futures in social movements if these seem disconnected from their reality.
Thanks, Sophie. So that's the introduction about models. We'll try to switch now to modules, and to propose this transition to modules that we think is important. So we'll need a bit of definitions here. Oh, damn. Okay, sorry. Okay. We'll start by talking about the real world, and then we'll go to modules themselves. If we think about the biggest system that we live in that can be understood by social science, is we postulate here that it's society, like so a society like the Canadian society that I'm inside right now, or many other societies in the world, is kind of the biggest thing we can understand as a whole, as a totality. This biggest social system is a set of smaller systems. So society is a set of smaller systems, and is, by the connection of those systems, a totality. So this is more or less what we could understand when Bourdieu or Luhmann are talking about society. It's this whole that takes everything in. And if we continue and see systems, systems are small part of a society that put together some institutions. They are related to other systems, like take, for example, an healthcare system in a society, or the organization of workplaces in a society. They are related to other systems, but they have their own inside functioning that has norms and codes that function together. And they put together institutions, which is, again, a lower level of society, that is a place where we have a set of social function that establish ways to access to services, access to good, give you legitimacy, and that gives rules and ways to operate. And also, and it's important for us as we understand the institution in a positive manner, that give the demos, the people, some autonomy, a vision inspired by Castoriadis. So when we as a collective, when we as a people, we want to do something, it often takes the form of an institution where we take collective decisions together. So these are the three main level that we can theorize in terms of what the real world look like in terms sociologically in very broad strokes. So now, if we want to simplify society and we want to understand it and be able to propose ideas for changing it, for building alternative visions, then we can say that what Sophie just presented, what Pat Devine and Michael Albert and Cornelius Castoriadis, when he wrote on socialism, built were models that are the equivalent to society. Stuff that put together a set of smaller systems, which we'll call modules, that are coherent and that aim for completeness. When you try to build a model, you're trying to say, okay, we'll try to cover the whole political and economic sphere and understand how it would all work together. And that's the challenge that the models creator are working for. When we're talking about modules, is the equivalent not of society, but of the system. Now we have a small problem, is that what's supposed to be written here doesn't appear, but no problem, I'll just say it to you. Is that the modules that are that we're proposing are in fact smaller systems, like the systems we were talking about in real life, but simplified, that are relationship between a few institutions that are working together for a common goal, for a common function, a common social function that we want to put together and that we want to see work. And all those modules will at terms be connected to one another, obviously, but our argument, and I'll come to that in a second, is that we don't need to do that right now. We don't need to connect them right away. So if we look here, at some models that are already being discussed, and that's also the interesting part here, is that the transition we're talking about is in fact happening. We as a research collective are making it happen because we are working on modular stuff, but we see that in many people working and publishing in post-capitalist political economy, but we see also that in more recent models that are, as if you think about the Daniel Saras model or Leibman's model, those are very, they attack very specific points in model, and they don't try to reproduce all the institutions, and they already look a bit like modules. But we are a few people, and I'm thinking about different texts, and I can mention references when we come back in question. I won't bore you with this today, but right now. But if you have questions, don't worry. You can ask them. But for example, you can build a module that a lot of us are working on about money and prices. How does money and prices act in a post-capitalist way? You can have this reflection, and people are having it, without having the full society around it to understand it. Same thing for social reproduction, or for how society can interact at the international level. We have proposed in a few texts a module for metabolic planning, the link between economy and ecology, and also the democratic definition of what people need. Or we could take a specific module about workplace organization. For example, you can isolate in participatory economics the suggestion about balanced job complexes. That is very interesting, but that could be applied in other contexts. Hence, there is already a module existing that can be debated, implemented elsewhere, or modified as we wish. Therefore, those modules, those set of institutions, seemed to us like a very interesting place to start. Why do we think we should choose modules? We see three objectives, and probably there's more in the end. But for example, we think we can attract new researchers, particularly from disciplines that are not present right now in post-capitalism and post-capitalist political economy. Why? Because if it's the question of the cost of entry that Sophie was talking about. If you have to learn about full models, and you have to read tons of books and know all the debates between those models and why they are disagreeing with each other and all that, the cost of entry is real high if you're coming to talk about a very specific subject and its post-capitalist implications. If you can enter the field by saying, okay, well, I'm working on households and how they can find a way to get homes and have apartments or houses and all that, and you're preoccupied by how in post-capitalism we'll make sure that everyone has a place to live. Well, if there is already a module debating on this, and already text written specifically on this and having debates on this, then the cost of entry for you will be quite low, well, at least lower, because you can understand what people are talking about and you can join this discussion quickly, and you don't have to learn about all the rest of the functioning of society right now. It's also for us a way to better the team research and advanced thinking on post-capitalism in groups and research groups. I think what was a problem with models is that it's so much linked to one or two persons that are defending and promoting the models that they've built, and Sophie will come back to that later. Is that it's really linked to personalities, to ideas that were developed for 30, 40 years, when if we start on modules, we can be a lot of people working on a very specific question and having very different ideas about how we can fix this problem or this modules, and put them all together and debate them and maybe change ideas, because they're not linked to a series of other modules that if you make a decision here, it will have an impact on this and on this and on this. No, it's more a system where you try and test ideas on what a module could look like. And then we think it's interesting to link what we're doing in post-capitalist political economy to transitions. We are confronted to crisis, the rise of fascism in many countries and all that, and we need to have solutions for people who are wanting to think about the transition, but who will do reforms and small changes right now, but who wants them to be in phase or in the same direction as a post-capitalist future. And modules can give us this opportunity, saying, well, okay, you're working on how workplace should be democratized, to come back to the example I was using earlier. Well, here's how you could envision a step forward to democracy that is interesting right now, but that also points you to how it could work in a post-capitalist society. So this transition could be facilitated from our point of view.
Yeah, I'll continue a bit on that and add more on how the modules would help to get us there, to these goals. So first, I'll talk about the reduced entry costs, then the reduced arbitrariness, the improved ordering capacity, and the enhanced contextual analysis. And basically, maybe to just before going there, basically what we propose is to invite people that work on post-capitalist proposals to think more in these modules, right? And to propose or to frame proposals on each of these different topics and to open up the discussion to discussing these topics separately. And of course, this has been done in political economy for a long time. And what our contribution is today, it's more to criticize the more recent developments in that the people that have written coherent models have led us to do right now. So like in the last decades or a few decades, the discussions have been increasingly focused on models. And so we want to invite us and them to discuss more and focus more on the modules, right? Yes, you can go to the next slide. I'm still on the same slide. I had this. Ooh. So seems like we lost Simon.
Oh,
Yeah, Eric.
do you have the presentation as well, or does it only
Yes.
Okay, then.
No, I have it.
Okay, yeah.
All right, Simon's back.
Sorry for that.
No, it's okay. Yes, so basically, to go a bit more into this reduced entry cost. So right now, like we said, you have all of these models and you have to see who talks about what, and you have to compare all of them, and you see what they all talk about. But what we could do with the using modules is first to establish certain modules like the price module, the international interface module, the ecology module, which would have we could have some convention on the boundaries that we establish for each of the models. And then we could talk about the different configurations that are possible for these modules. And so discussing about the different content that each thinker or each proposals suggests for configuring the module. So yeah. And so what we suggest is that we could kind of decompose the models. It's kind of hard because the two words are kind of similar. So I'll try to just exaggerate the pronunciation. The models, we could decompose them and kind of look at how they what their proposals are for each of the modules. And this doesn't mean that we can completely reduce the discussion to a set of modules that are completely independent. Of course, that's not the case. They are, they have, there are like potentials for compatibility between different configurations of, for example, the price module and the international interface module. We cannot have any kind of configuration put together like a I don't know, like a puzzle, putting pieces together. But at least we can open up the discussion and talk explicitly about the theoretical assumptions and the political positionings that underlie, or yeah, that are behind the choices for configuring each module in that way. And so in that way, we think that it would lead to reduced arbitrariness because when thinkers propose a coherent model, like, for example, Albert and Hanel, when they proposed their participatory economics model, they do have to make choices, right? They propose something that is coherent, and so they have to tackle different questions, such as the question of compensation, the question of investment, the question of ecology. And so they take decisions on how to tackle each of these questions. And the decisions that they take, they try to make them as coherent as possible, but at the same time, there is always a certain level of arbitrariness in each of the decisions that they make. And so, for example, in the compensation module, what we would suggest to call a compensation module, and we could see that the participatory economy model has important institutions that constitute this module. And one of them is to compensate workers according to their effort and level of sacrifice. So, for example, they propose to grade each task according to their sacrifice value, and then to arrange remuneration according to that. But they also have this other institution that is the balanced jobs complex, which is they think that each person should have jobs that are a collection of different jobs or different tasks that are balanced in how unpleasant they are. And so these are two different ideas that have different underlying political positioning behind them, and different theoretical standpoints. For example, the effort and sacrifice. Well, maybe I'll come back to the underlying things just in a minute. I'll jump just to, for example, they also have a certain way of organizing investment and present these development plans. And they also have a certain way to deal with the ecological question. Specifically, they present what they call the pollution damage revealing mechanism, which is basically an attempt at internalizing environmental burdens. In a way, in a polluter-payer kind of scheme with a Pigovian tax, where the cost of pollution would be evaluated and determined by the affected parties, and that cost would be included in the pricing of even if it's a shadow pricing, the pricing of goods, which then would affect the planning process and would affect the planning decisions. And this, of course, is also relying on a lot of assumptions on what it's possible to do. So you can switch to the next slide, where I added, for example, this on the ecology module. This pollution damage revealing mechanism relies on the belief that it is possible to account for environmental burdens on a monetary scale, that it's possible to put a price on pollution, and that it's possible when we internalize this price and include it to the pricing of goods, that consumers will react to this change of price according to the belief that they act on the basis of maximizing the utility, which is some belief and theoretical framework anchored in neoclassical economics. So some people, for example, could disagree with that. And our point is that here, if we make explicit these postulates and theoretical underpinnings, if we talk about the modules separately, we have the possibility, we say, we want to tell people, well, it's not because for example, I don't believe in the possibility of their treatment of ecology to work or to be interesting or to be inspiring, that I should reject all of the models altogether, all of this model altogether, right? And so we want to look at the different proposals that they make, because their proposals related to compensation are also very interesting and could be of interest for different people and in different contexts. And for example, their idea of like remunerating according to effort and sacrifice is related to a certain idea of merit and a certain conception of human motivation, but also to a commitment to self-management in wanting that workplaces organize on their own in a self-managed way. So making explicit these underlying assumptions according to us, have the potential to reduce the arbitrariness that is inherent in the process of creating models. Then, talking about modules opens up the possibility of ordering possible configurations of the modules. For example, the compensation module. I talked already how different proposals could be seen as configurations of a module. And so, for example, this is one way we could order them, but it's of course not the only one, and it is a simplification. But for example, we could order them as being more or less close to capitalism or far to capitalism. And for example, if we look at the compensation module, we could see how having compensation related to participation to output by looking at how much people produce would be closer to capitalism. And we can see how if we look at their compensation being related to effort and sacrifice, it's already a little bit further away, but it's still related to contribution in a way. If we add in a universal basic income or some kind of universal allowance, then it already shifts a bit and changes the logic. And finally, if we have a system in which there is no link between work, effort, and consumption at all, we could see that as being very far from capitalism. And this is a simplified typology, of course, and we could do the same here with workplace organization. I'll let you read this. But we could order the possibilities according to different criteria. And look at, for example, more decentralized or more centralized configurations of these models, more formal and informal or spontaneous and planned. And we could look at different criteria. For example, some criteria have been suggested by Simon in an older article. But if we look at these criteria and look at how different configurations of modules interact with these criteria or respond to these criteria, it can allow us to see more clearly what are the different possibilities for post-capitalist configurations of and responses to these specific questions. And finally, maybe this is the most controversial slide, but we believe that it makes it possible to compare proposals of post-capitalist futures with reality, and in a way to assess strengths and weaknesses of real-life institutions. And so this is without assuming that the transition to post-capitalism would happen in some kind of cumulative way, but still just to help us figure out which are maybe the strengths and the weaknesses of different institutional contexts. But here it's an example of Quebec's level of compatibility with certain modules. It allows us, for example, to see that Quebec has 0% effort-based compensation. There are a part of needs that are met outside of the formal workplace. 14% of the reproduction is socialized. So if we talk about reproductive reproductive work, which parts are happening in the household and which parts are socialized. We can see that a certain part of work is democratized and that a certain part of investment is public. And so in a way, it can help us to see, kind of to analyze the current capitalist societies and to see in different contexts to what extent they are compatible or relate to, let's say, certain post-capitalist proposals. Yeah, I give to Simon.
And now we'll go to the limits of this idea. Well, the limit is quite obvious that with a model you cannot design an entire society. It's our starting point anyway. So for people looking to do a complete society on their own and to rethink it on their own, obviously modules are not the best options. At the end, it might be possible connecting modules to one another to redo the work the conceptors of models did in the past. It's possible to do it, but it's not the goal. The idea is not to get there. The idea is more to show, as Sophie mentioned, a diversity of possibility of configuration of those modules. It may suggest coherence when there is none. The problem with modules is that you put them side by side, and some people could say, oh, well, and do kind of a jigsaw puzzle kind of way and put together pieces that don't fit together. And the module aren't thought to provide this coherence and those links between the modules. They're more there to show the diversity of options. A question could be, is this anything new? Aren't we doing this all the time anyway in social sciences? Like, for example, people working right now about social reproduction, as Sophie mentioned, social reproduction just earlier, aren't they already suggesting ways to overcome capitalism or organize social reproduction in a ways that would be emancipatory and all that? It might be the case, and if it's the case, well, putting all those ideas together would already be something good. But from my experience, it's really not always the case. Is the idea of thinking about a positive option, about another way to organize stuff in a way that is not capitalistic, is not that it's not that popular. It's not being done that much. We certainly can have more of that kind of visions and organizing in specific context modules as we propose them. Is it a risk? Some people, when we propose that, tell us, well, if you bring people that are not already working on models of post-capitalist society, and you bring them into working on those modules, they might propose you stuff that are compatible with capitalism. And it is indeed a risk to have this kind of proposals coming up, but it's a risk everywhere. It's always a risk. The idea of recentering or of a kind of reformism, things like that. The way to combat and to reduce that risk is not to say we have absolutely to talk about the social totality all the time. The way we can reduce that risk is to criticize proposals that are closer to capitalism and that do not lead us to emancipatory visions. And the fact that it's on modules or on models doesn't change that. We have to have this critical discussion anyway, in one case or another. Let's conclude quickly by what happens next. Well, we see a few research avenues that are interesting in our idea. Defining modules would be a good start. As you saw, we have a few ideas and we are already working on specific modules, and others are too. But something that we could do as a research group is maybe trying to bring together what have been done in terms of modules in already existing models that we could take parts of and separate them in different modules, and other articles that are not pertaining to bigger models but can also be integrated. Also, the idea of finding empirical data, we are working on this in the case of Quebec, trying to see what can be, for example, planned in our economy, which sector of the economy can be planned and can be thought of from a post-capitalist perspective. So trying to understand specific society from the point of view of very specific modules that we've developed would be very interesting. So that's empirical data and case studies that are both mentioned here, but also making links with social movement. We think that it will be simpler to have discussions with social movement when we talk about the subject matter that they're fighting on and saying, well, do you want a post-capitalist vision on that specific? You're fighting against rent hikes in your city and all that. Do you want to have a vision of what could housing look like in a post-capitalist society? Well, we have stuff on this and we are researching on this. And I think this would be a bit more easy to grapple than a whole post-capitalist model of a whole society that you have to adapt to adopt and buy all in one. So conclusions quickly. The models that were developed in the precedent decades will still be there. They will still be discussed. We're not saying that we should not discuss them anymore or should not read them. And they will be included in the process of building modules anyway. But the question that we're raising is the role of research in our field. And do we have a debate and chicaneries on very big models that you need to learn and know by detail and by heart, and debate on very specific details and debates that are there for 10, 20 years and you have to get on board with them? Or is it an opportunity for extensive interdisciplinary teamwork and networks on very, very mundane and specific issues that we can focus on in modules, and that we can try to see how can we envision what we can do about social reproduction, workplace organization, housing, to give the example that we brought up today, and try to see what they could look like in a post-capitalist society, and try to build together on this. So that's it for us. Right on time, after an hour. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll be there to answer your questions.
Yes, thank you. One thing, we're going to open up the Q&A in a second. One thing I want to highlight is on the 2nd of April, we're going to have our next event with Walter Zeug on, it's a model-focused event where he's going to present the model that he and Jakob Heyer have been building. Here's the link for that. And if you're interested in that and want to register for the Zoom session, here you can do so. Yes, and then I'd say I'd conclude the recording and open it up for the discussion. Thanks a lot.